Welcome to the Overthinker's Guide to Modern Marketing, or as we like to call it,
How to sell a sandwich without accidentally starting a cult.
Hello and welcome back to the Overthinker's Guide to Modern Marketing, the podcast where we explore the curious things humans do when they attempt to organise businesses, build brands and occasionally choose fonts with the intensity normally reserved for architectural decisions. I'm your host Sean Makin, a man who once believed branding was primarily about designing logos and choosing colour palettes that looked sufficiently competent. This seemed entirely reasonable at the time. After all, when most people first encountered branding, they encountered the visible parts. The logo, the website, the shiny bits. These are the parts of the brand that face outward towards the world, and because they are visible, they feel like the brand itself. But the longer you work in marketing, the more you begin to realise something rather important. A brand is simply not what people see, it's what people experience. And perhaps more importantly, what people experience inside the organisation long before a customer ever sees the logo. Which means that branding is not just a design exercise, it's a cultural one. And culture, as it turns out, is a slightly messier thing than a logo. So grab yourself a cup of something caffeinated and slightly fashionable, ideally with a name that sounds like a Scandinavian jazz musician. Sit back and let's spend the next wee while overthinking this together.
Episode 7, The Curious Journey from Logo to Language, or
Why a brand is not just a logo, but a conversation everyone is supposed to understand.
Let's begin where many branding conversations begin. The logo. The logo is the small but determined symbol that appears on everything. Websites, packaging, social media posts, conference banners, and occasionally embroidered on corporate polo shirts and networking events where everyone is politely pretending to enjoy themselves. Logos are useful. They help people recognise organisations. They provide visual shorthand in a crowded world where attention spans are roughly the length of a biscuit break. But a logo alone does not create a brand. It represents something that already exists, or at least something that should exist. Behind every strong brand lies something far more important: culture. The collective habits, behaviours and beliefs of the people inside the organisation itself. Because if a company's internal culture does not match the promises suggested by its logo and messaging, the disconnect becomes obvious remarkably quickly. Employees notice, customers notice, occasionally even the office printer seems to notice, though its reaction is usually limited to refusing to print important documents. Early in my career, I encountered several companies with beautifully designed branding, elegant logos, confident messaging, ambitious taglines about collaboration, innovation, and customer focus. On paper, they looked magnificent. Internally, things were very different. Communication flowed in rigid hierarchies, departments worked in isolation, ideas struggled to travel between teams. The brand promised collaboration, reality delivered polite confusion, and customers, clever creatures that they are, tend to detect this mismatch sooner or later. Which leads us to an important realisation. A brand is not the logo. The logo is merely the symbol of the culture behind it. There is a particular moment in the life of every organisation when a group of otherwise sensible adults gather in a meeting room to discuss the meaning of a logo. Someone points at the design and says it represents movement. Another suggests it symbolises the customer journey. Someone else feels the curved line represents growth and innovation. And everybody nods thoughtfully. Meanwhile, the designer who actually created the logo is sitting quietly at the end of the table thinking,
I just thought the serif looked nice.
And yet, mysteriously, by the end of the meeting, the logo has come to represent progress, transformation, resilience, and the spirit of human collaboration. At no point does anyone say what everyone is quietly thinking, which is,
It's a slightly stylised T.
Which is an impressive achievement for something originally sketched on a napkin while the designer was waiting in the queue for the toilet at a very damp Glastonbury.
Part 2. Communication, the bedrock of culture.
If brand culture is the soil on which a company grows, then communication is the water, sunlight, and occasional confused gardener wondering why the tomatoes look suspiciously like cucumbers. In other words, communication is what keeps culture alive. Now, when people hear the phrase internal communication, they often imagine something dull like long company emails, SharePoint news posts, a PowerPoint entitled
Quarterly Strategic Alignment Overview.
And while those things certainly do exist, sometimes in impressive quantities, real communication inside an organisation is something much more ordinary. It's the conversations that happen throughout the day, the quick discussions between colleagues, the questions asked in meetings, the tone people use when solving problems. These small everyday interactions gradually shape the culture of the organisation, and culture in turn shapes the brand. Consider how ideas move through an organisation. In some companies, ideas flow easily. People ask questions, colleagues challenge assumptions, suggestions travel across departments. In other companies, however, ideas travel with the approximate speed of continental drift. A suggestion made in one department must pass through several meetings, 3 approval processes, and a carefully worded email chain before it reaches someone who can actually do something about it, which means the idea eventually arrives, but slightly tired. Communication, you see, determines how quickly ideas move, and ideas are the lifeblood of innovation. One of the most revealing things about organisations is the culture really announces itself directly. No one walks into the office and declares,
Good morning, everybody. Today our culture will be beautifully collaborative and supportive, assuming the Wi-Fi cooperates.
Instead, culture reveals itself through behaviour. How leaders respond to questions, how teams handle mistakes, whether feedback is encouraged or quietly avoided. These behaviours send signals, small signals perhaps, but powerful ones. Over time, employees learn what the organisation truly values, not from posters on the wall, but from actually what happens when decisions are made. So let's talk about the difference between stated values and lived values. Many organisations proudly list their values.
Integrity, innovation, collaboration, customer focus.
These words appear on websites, presentations, and office walls printed up in reassuring fonts and bright colours. But values only become meaningful when they influence behaviour. For example, if a company claims to value innovation but discourages new ideas, employees quickly notice the contradiction. If a company claims to value collaboration but rewards individual effort, the message becomes confusing. And confusion in culture spreads quickly, which is why internal communication plays such a critical role. It helps translate abstract values into everyday behaviour. Now, it would be impossible to discuss internal communication without mentioning meetings. Meetings are fascinating environments where communication theoretically occurs. In the best meetings, ideas are freely exchanged. People listen. Questions lead to insights. Progress is made. In other meetings, progress is perhaps more philosophical. Strategy meetings, for example, often begin with a deceptively simple question.
Where do we want the brand to go next?
Eventually, someone says something encouraging like,
We need to be more strategic.
and everybody agrees that this is an excellent strategy that appears to involve a number of arrows pointing in a very promising direction. No one is entirely certain of where the arrows lead, but they do look confident. The success of a meeting, however, depends less on the agenda and more on the environment. Do people feel comfortable speaking? Are questions welcomed? Is curiosity encouraged? Because these subtle dynamics shape how communication actually works inside an organisation, and communication in the end shapes culture. Another important aspect of internal communication is trust. When communication flows openly, people feel informed. When information is shared clearly, uncertainty decreases, and when people understand the reasoning behind decisions, they are far more likely to support those decisions. Trust, in many ways, grows through communication. Not through grand speeches, not through elaborate announcements, but through consistent, honest conversations over time. And when trust grows internally, something rather interesting happens externally. Customers begin to experience the brand differently, because employees who trust their organisation behave differently. They speak with confidence. They solve problems more creatively. They represent the brand authentically. And this is where internal communication quietly becomes branding. Customers may never see the internal meetings. They may never read the company emails, but they experience the results. They notice it when customer service teams respond thoughtfully. They notice it when products reflect genuine attention to detail. They notice it when employees speak about the organisation with enthusiasm rather than cautious neutrality. In other words, the internal culture becomes visible through external behaviour, which means branding is not simply something organisations broadcast. It is something they demonstrate, and that leads to a slightly reassuring realisation for anyone responsible for brand strategy. You don't build a brand culture solely through visual identity or marketing campaigns. You build it through conversations, through everyday communication, through the small decisions and interactions that gradually shape how people behave. Which means the brand is not only created by the designers and marketers, it's created by everybody inside the organisation, usually somewhere between cups of coffee and slightly ambitious project deadlines. And that, in its own quiet way, is where the real brand lives.
Part 3. From logo to language.
We now arrive at something slightly more subtle, but arguably far more powerful. Language. Because while logos may help people recognise a brand, language helps people understand it. And understanding in branding is where the real magic happens. You see, brands do not exist only in visual form, they also exist in words, in the phrases people repeat, and in the tone people use when communicating with customers. In the way employees describe the company when someone asks the perfectly reasonable question,
"So, what exactly does your organisation do?"
This moment, incidentally, is where brand language becomes very important. Because if 10 employees answer the question in 10 different ways, the brand begins to resemble a choir where everyone is enthusiastically singing, but not necessarily the same tune. Language shapes how people think. This is not merely a philosophical observation, it's a practical one. The words organisations choose influence how employees interpret their work. Consider two companies describing the same activity. One might say,
"We process customer requests."
another might say,
"We help customers solve problems."
technically both describe the same task, but the tone, and therefore the mindset, is completely different. The first suggests admin, the second suggests service. And over time, the language an organisation uses begins to influence the behaviours of the people inside it, which means language is not just communication, it's culture in motion. Over time, successful organisations develop something interesting, a shared vocabulary. Certain phrases appear again and again. Ideas are described in similar ways. People begin using the same words to explain the company's purpose. At first, this language may come from the brand guidelines or leadership messages, but eventually something more interesting happens. The language becomes natural. Employees stop using the words because they were told to, they start using them because they believe them. And that's the moment a brand moves from being a document to being a culture. Another important aspect of brand language is tone. Tone determines how a brand sounds. Some brands sound formal and authoritative. Others sound friendly and conversational. Some aim for playful humour. Others prefer calm professionalism. None of these approaches are inherently right or wrong. But what matters is consistency. Because when tone changes unpredictably, the brand begins to feel, slightly confused. Imagine meeting someone who speaks calmly and professionally one moment, and then suddenly adopts the enthusiasm of a children's television presenter. You might find the experience memorable, but perhaps not entirely reassuring. Brands work the same way. Consistency builds familiarity, and familiarity builds trust. Over time, brand language begins to shape how people inside the organisation understand their roles. If a company frequently talks about craftsmanship, employees begin to think about quality and detail. If the language emphasises innovation, people feel encouraged to experiment. If the language centres around community, collaboration naturally becomes more important. In this way, language quietly reinforces the culture, not through instructions but through repetition. Because humans are storytelling creatures, we make sense of the world through narrative, and the language a company uses gradually becomes the narrative that defines the brand. I would like to at this point make a small but important observation. Now, here's an interesting thought. If you removed a company's logo entirely, no colours, no design, no visual identity, and simply listened to how employees talked about the organisation, you would still learn a great deal about the brand. You would hear about their priorities, you would hear the values, you would hear what people generally believe about the work they do, which suggests something rather interesting. The most powerful branding element a company possesses may not be its logo at all. It may be the conversations actually happening between its people.
Part 4. A curious observation about office language.
If you want to understand a company's culture, you don't necessarily need to read its mission statement. In fact, reading a mission statement is often the least efficient way to understand anything. Instead, simply listen carefully to how people talk. Better yet, observe the office kitchen. In some offices, people chat, share ideas, and occasionally debate important cultural questions such as whether the milk belongs inside the fridge door, on the windowsill, or mysteriously in the back of the cupboard where someone definitely put it by accident. In other offices, the kitchen is silent. The only sound is the kettle boiling and someone quietly Googling the phrase,
Jobs that involve fewer meetings.
culture reveals itself in small places and small conversations. Every organisation eventually develops its own internal language. Some companies talk about innovation, others talk about quality, and some emphasise community. Others emphasise speed and efficiency, or the slightly mysterious concept of synergy, which appears rather frequently in meetings but rarely in the wild. At first, these words tend to appear in brand documents and presentations, printed neatly in slides, often accompanied by optimistic diagrams and arrows pointing in promising directions. But words only become meaningful when people begin using them naturally. When employees say them without checking the brand guidelines first, when the words show up in everyday conversations, that is the difference between saying a brand value and living a brand value. One appears confidently in the marketing deck, the other appears quietly in daily behaviour, usually somewhere between the kettle boiling and someone asking,
Has anyone seen the good biscuits?
Part 5. When culture and brand align.
So, we have talked about logos, communication, and the evolution of brand language. We now rock up at the moment where everything either comes together beautifully or wanders off in slightly different directions like a group of tourists who forgot to agree at a meeting point. This moment is alignment. The phrase alignment appears frequently in business discussions. It suggests that everyone in the organisation is moving confidently in the same direction.
This way, everybody!
In practice, alignment often means that most people are heading roughly north while occasionally checking whether anyone else knows exactly where north is, which to be fair is still an improvement over walking in a completely different direction. When the internal culture of an organisation matches the external brand it presents to the world, something rather magical occurs. The brand stops feeling like marketing and it becomes to feel more like reality. Now, customers are remarkably good at detecting authenticity. They may not consciously analyse brand messaging or organisational culture, but they notice how things feel. If a company claims to be friendly, customers notice whether employees actually behave in a friendly way. If a brand promises innovation, customers quickly see whether the organisation produces interesting ideas or simply writes the word innovation in large letters on the website. And when the internal culture genuinely reflects the external promise, the brand becomes believable. Not because it's advertised, but because it's experienced, which is far more persuasive. One of the most interesting effects of cultural alignment happens inside the organisation. Employees stop feeling like they're representing the brand, instead they feel like they're simply being themselves within a culture that makes sense. This is a subtle but powerful shift. When people believe in the values of our organisation, they speak about the brand differently. They explain it more clearly, they solve problems with more confidence, they represent the company naturally without needing to consult the brand guidelines first. And when employees feel comfortable embodying the brand, they become something every organisation secretly hopes for: brand ambassadors. And I don't mean the social media kind of variety of brand ambassadors, you know, the kind of ones that hold branded mugs and pose enthusiastically in front of unsuspecting coffee drinkers who simply wanted a quiet latte. No, I mean the genuine kind. The people who believe in what the organisation does and talks about it naturally, without needing a hashtag, a ring light, or a carefully staged photograph involving a cappuccino. Alignment creates what we might call a virtuous cycle. It works something like this. The organisation defines a clear purpose and culture. Then, the employees understand it and believe in it. Their behaviour reflects those values, customers experience that behaviour, trust grows, success reinforces the culture, and the brand becomes stronger as a result. Round and round it goes, rather like a hamster wheel powered by human enthusiasm, or at least mild professional satisfaction. And of course, not every organisation achieves this harmony immediately. Sometimes the external brand evolves faster than the internal culture. Sometimes leadership introduces a bold new vision that takes a little time for everybody else to fully understand. And sometimes the brand strategy arrives before the organisational behaviour has quite caught up with the plan. When this happens, the brand can feel slightly aspirational, which is a polite way of saying the organisation is still trying to figure things out. It's a bit like announcing you're a world-class chef while still reading the instructions on the oven. That's not necessarily a problem, because brands, like organisations, tend to develop gradually, through experimentation, adjustment, and the occasional slightly awkward phrase when everybody works out what the new direction actually means on a Tuesday afternoon. Usually, sometime after the meeting where someone introduced a beautifully designed slide explaining the new vision, complete with several arrows pointing in a very encouraging direction. The culture, of course, then spends the next few months catching up with those arrows, which, to be fair, are very persuasive arrows. Brands evolve, cultures grow, alignment often develops gradually. The important thing is that the organisation continues to move in the same direction, because culture changes slowly, but it does change. So what is the role of leadership in maintaining alignment? Well, it's crucial. Not through grand speeches, not through inspirational posters featuring mountain climbers and phrases like
Reach your potential!
but through everyday decisions. Leaders reinforce culture through their behaviour. What they prioritise, what they reward, what they tolerate, and occasionally what they quietly pretend not to notice during meetings. Because employees are excellent observers. They may not read the entire strategy document, but they are remarkably good at noticing what actually gets rewarded around here. If leaders say innovation is important, but become nervous whenever someone suggests trying something new, people notice. If collaboration is listed as a core value, but promotions seem to go exclusively to that person who talks the longest in meetings, people notice that too. Over time, these signals shape behaviour. Employees adjust, the culture grows stronger, and the brand becomes clearer. And this is usually not because of a particularly impressive slide, but because people quietly watched what leadership actually did on a Tuesday afternoon. As the momentum builds, something subtle but powerful happens. Customers begin describing the brand in the same way the company describes itself. Employees speak about their organisation with genuine pride. The language inside and outside the organisation becomes consistent. And at that point, the brand stops being something that requires explanation, it becomes something people recognise, and when that happens, the organisation has achieved something remarkable. The brand has moved from design to identity, from marketing message to lived experience, for which, for any brand strategist, is a rather satisfying outcome, even if the local discussion still takes several more meetings.
Part 6. The role of purpose.
We have explored logos, language, culture, and the mysterious social behaviour of office coffee machines. We now arrive at something that sits quietly underneath it all. Purpose. Purpose is one of those words that appears frequently in branding conversations, usually in phrases like,
We need to define our purpose. Let's reconnect with the organisation's purpose.
which suggests the purpose was last seen leaving a meeting room and no one has quite managed to locate it since. Or the particularly confident suggestion,
I think our purpose slide should come before the strategy slide.
which is a helpful reminder that explaining why the plan exists before unveiling the 12-step diagram of arrows might, in fact, be a sensible order. These discussions are usually accompanied by whiteboards, sticky notes, and the growing suspicion that the purpose is definitely written down somewhere, possibly on slide 14. Purpose answers the question, Why does this organisation exist? And more importantly, why should anyone care? Now, organisations sometimes attempt to answer this question by writing what is known as a purpose or mission statement. This is a document that explains the deeper meaning behind the organisation's existence. In theory, this should be inspiring, memorable and clear. In practice, many statements end up sounding something like this.
Our purpose is to empower innovative solutions that create meaningful value for stakeholders.
And I think you'll agree that that is a wonderfully optimistic sentence. But it could also describe a bank, a coffee company, a software firm, a manufacturer of extremely advanced staplers. This isn't because the organisations lack purpose. It's because purpose can be surprisingly difficult to describe, especially when several intelligent people are trying to write it down at the same time. Usually around a table covered in sticky notes, biscuit crumbs, and increasingly philosophical discussions about the word empower and what it actually means. What does purpose actually do? When purpose works well, it performs an incredibly useful function. It gives the organisation direction. Purpose acts like a compass, not a map, because businesses rarely follow tidy routes. More like a compass that quietly reminds people which way is north while they navigate the occasional swamp of unexpected emails and project deadlines. When employees understand the organisation's purpose, decisions become easier. Questions like,
Should we pursue this opportunity?
or
Is this the right way to solve this problem?
suddenly have a reference point. The answer becomes, does this move us closer to our purpose or mission? If yes, excellent. If not, perhaps reconsider. This is remarkably helpful in organisations where decisions have to be made quickly. The interesting thing about purpose is that in everyday behaviour, it really announces itself dramatically. It doesn't appear in meetings wearing a name badge that says, "Hello, I am the organisational purpose." Instead, purpose appears quietly in everyday decisions. In how teams prioritise work, in how employees speak about customers, in how problems are solved. When purpose is clear, people tend to behave in ways that support it naturally, which means culture becomes consistent, and consistency is one of the things that makes brands feel trustworthy. There is often a moment inside organisations when purpose suddenly becomes tangible. It usually happens when someone explains the company's work to a new employee or a customer. So instead of describing products or services, they describe impact, something like,
We help organizations work more efficiently. We make technology easier for people to use.
We help communities access better bouncy castles.
At that moment, the work stops sounding like a collection of tasks. It starts sounding like a mission, and missions, humans have discovered throughout history, are surprisingly motivating. Here's a small but important observation. Purpose does not have to be dramatic in order to be meaningful. Not every organisation is trying to save the world. Some are trying simply to make useful things, provide reliable services, or solve practical problems. And that is perfectly respectable. Purpose doesn't need to be grand, it simply needs to be true, because authenticity travels surprisingly well throughout organisations. Employees recognise it, customers recognise it, and when people recognise authenticity, trust usually follows.
Part 7. The Curious Evolution of the Brand.
One of the most interesting aspects of brand culture is that it evolves. Brands are not static objects, they are living systems, which is a way of saying that they behave slightly like ecosystems, occasionally flourishing, occasionally confused, and sometimes producing unexpected results after someone reorganises the website. As organisations grow, the culture shifts. New employees join, new ideas emerge, new challenges appear. Occasionally, someone introduces a new collaboration tool that promises to simplify communication and instead creates 3 additional places where conversations now happen. The language evolves, the culture adapts, and the brand gradually reflects these changes. This evolution is natural. In fact, it's unavoidable because organisations are made of people, and people have a curious habit of bringing their personalities, opinions, and occasionally their preferred biscuit choices into the workplace. Over time, these influences shape how the organisation behaves, which in turn shapes how the brand is experienced. The real challenge is not stopping change. That would be roughly as successful as trying to stop email. The challenge is assuring that the core purpose remains clear, while everything else evolves around it. Because when the purpose remains consistent, the brand remains recognisable, even if the culture grows, even as the organisation changes, and even as the marketing team occasionally updates the logo for what they describe as a
slight refresh.
that still somehow requires dozens of meetings and a new presentation deck. And that's the curious thing about brands. They evolve, but when the purpose is clear, people still recognise who they're talking to.
Part 8. The human element.
At the heart of brand culture lies something beautifully simple. People. Not the brand guidelines, not the colour palette, and certainly not the carefully organised folder on someone's desk titled in caps,
Final brand assets final use this one.
Brands are not created by design software, they're created by the people who live them. The employees who represent them, the leaders who reinforce the values, the teams who embody the culture throughout their behaviour. Because culture isn't something that lives in a PDF file or a PowerPoint deck, it lives in everyday moments. In how colleagues talk to each other, how problems get solved, how customers are treated when something goes wrong. These small interactions gradually shape how the brand is experienced, not just by customers, but by everybody inside the organisation, including the new employee who's quietly trying to figure out whether the company culture is
collaborative and innovative,
as the website claims, or simply very good at writing collaborative and innovative things on the website. And over time, that experience becomes the real brand, usually somewhere between the marketing strategy and the office kettle.
Closing thought. From symbol to story.
So what does this all mean for organisations trying to build meaningful brands? It means the logo is only the beginning. Visual identity matters, but it's only one layer of the brand. The deeper layer is culture. And culture emerges from communication, language, purpose, and shared behaviour. When these elements align, the brand becomes something powerful. Not just a symbol, but a story. A story lived daily by the people who work inside the organisation. And when that happens, the logo becomes something remarkable. Not merely a design, but a signal. A shorthand for everything that the brand represents. So that brings us to the end of yet another episode of the podcast. Thank you so much for joining me on this exploration of brand culture. And until next time, stay curious and remember, a logo may start the conversation, but culture is what makes people believe it. Cheers.
The Overthinker's Guide to Modern Marketing is available on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Audible, and many other places where curious people occasionally pause to think about branding, behaviour, and the strange things humans do in business.